Now that we're finding a bunch of like out of place archaeology things like Göbekli Tepe and things like that that kind of are changing the narrative, I think that we really need to relook at sites like Sumer and stuff like that as not a place that just popped up and civilization just formed, but as a migration that was forced due to the um, changes that were happening in like the weather and flooding and things like that when like the Younger Dryas period, when the ice sheets and stuff got affected and were melting and there was that mass flooding. So this would have forced migration. This would have explained why things are stopped, but they're not just going to have completely wiped off the map. They would have either integrated with new populations, and we see this in like DNA, where you see where people just look like they popped up or whatever. They didn't just pop up; they were forced from a different demographic or thing. So it also makes sense, like if humans were born in Africa and then they migrated out, that not everybody would have migrated, that there would have been an ability to stay there and progress faster than the people that had to travel. Now they would have gained different knowledges and stuff like that, but by the time they got to their locations and are starting to build and do these things, if that original place starts getting affected by the Younger Dryas impact, or the Zealandia flood or whatever, a Zoo something flood that happened. I can't remember. I mix up some things sometimes when I'm tracking too many things. Um, the point here isn't to try to lay out a map of the timeline. It's to say that if we relook at the anomalies and the new things that are popping up, there is a better, easier explanation of things, that things didn't happen so, worldwide wipeout. We know that scientifically, when we look at the geology of the planet and how things were affected and stuff, we know that different areas were affected at different times. So different people would have been reset, essentially, or forced to migrate and lose different skills and abilities, because when they migrate, they're now working with different materials than what they're used to. So they're not going to have the same exact skill level, or they're migrating and dealing with other people. Their focus shifts to trying to integrate into a new population. Um, and DNA actually tracks a lot of this, when you start looking at it this way, as mixing of things and migrations and moving of things, rather than this linear, we were from hunter gatherers to civilization, to settling to civilization, all of these things. And then it also puts a lot of these structures that are like temples and worship and all of these things, like um, as possibly a little bit more than that. And we know that just with the way humans work, it's easier to build where something was already, there's a foundation of things. So humans are going to build in the same spot, not just in a new location completely. Like, why would you completely go to a new location if you're traveling and you find a location that already has a basis to set up on? That's where you're going to stop and you're going to set things up, right? That would just make logical sense. So a lot of the places that we have dated to stuff could be from the world actually have being populated way before that we realize it, but due to the world constantly changing, natural disasters, things like this, people have had to migrate, change things, do things differently. And this has pushed and made a more complex thing than we look at it. So like when we're looking at the picture, we think that we're looking at a solid picture, when we're actually looking at layers and layers and layers of things. And like you see this in like Sacsayhuaman and like Machu Picchu and stuff like that, where you have structures that are bigger megalithic type of things, and then you have smaller rock structures and things like that built on top of it. And you see this in other parts of the world, where you can clearly see that there's different people of different time periods that were building in the same location. So it would make sense if these time periods are stretched out enough that they're actually hitting in the time periods that we know the world was going through different things, flooding, earthquakes, uh, volcano eruptions, all these different things that affect different areas and affect the environment and the climate and everything differently, which then forces humans to act and move and do different things. Um, and then when that area, so like if you've ever been through a natural disaster, it can wipe out an area for a period of time. Think of like New Orleans, like it got wiped out a couple times. They tried to rebuild it, like they say. So you can see where humans do this, but there's a certain point where you can lose over it and it not be built uponable by your time period anymore. But centuries later, other people come upon it and then can build upon what you had left and abandoned. Now it's not going to be perfect. There's only going to be bits and parts of it because it was obviously abandoned for a reason. But this mindset and this, um, like, just re-looking at things. So not having tools and stuff would be easier explained because if they're from a further back time period, their tools are different than ours as far as they have dinosaur bones and things like this that they're going to have had more access to because that's fresher in their time. Like, you know what I mean? They're closer to digging that stuff up than we are. So they're able to utilize this stuff. And we know this historically that humans do use animal bones and things like this as tools. So this isn't a far stretch to say that these things that we don't understand how humans were able to do and build and stuff like this, we're not understanding the true time scale of these things. If people weren't doing these in hundreds of years or 20 years or the crazy mathematics that we're thinking it is because we work so instantaneously, we're talking about people that didn't have home phones and they didn't have TVs and they didn't have the internet to distract them. They only had working and doing these kind of things. These things were important to them at that time. When you built a monumental structure at that time, that was you, that was all of you, your whole community, everybody did it. You didn't have to be forced to do it because it was that or go find food. You know what I mean? It's a different world that we're talking about, and we're trying to think about it from like this world. Like, I heard a little kid make a statement about food coming from a store, like their brain thinking that food came packaged in a store and the parent having to explain that no, that's not kind of how it works. And like the parent kind of like trying to age appropriately explain that meat doesn't come from the store. So it's the same type of thing. Is when progression happens, you lose a lot of like the mindset of stuff. So just a few hundred years ago, people, when it came to making food, that was an hours and hours long process because there was multiple steps. Like if you had to make bread and you had to do all of these things, those took hours to do each of them. You had to let them set and rise. And so they moved slower and had more time to do things, where we live in a world where it's hard to catch your breath. You're constantly going, you're constantly moving. Our cars move fast, our jobs move fast, everything moves fast. You have fast food, everything is instantaneous. Give. So we're looking at these things with this mindset of, oh, they had to have done these things so quickly. No, they could have spent a million years building the Ellora cave, the Ellora temple cave. You know what I mean? We don't know. And think about it now, when we go visit sites and stuff like that, humans now still today want to mark with their name. If you had the abilities to chisel and carve and do those things, because these are the skills that you worked on most of your life, because you hunted, gathered, you didn't have so many type of distractions. Yes, you still had the societal things. You guys could hang out and you could cook and you could do things like that. We can see this in Sumer and stuff like that, and beer. And so it's not like it didn't have other things that they could do, but they didn't have the same type of distractions that we do. You can sit in front of your phone for hours and hours doom scrolling, or just sitting there. I've done it myself, sitting there for 2 hours and look and realize I lost 2 hours scrolling through shorts, and I probably actually watched 3 of them. The rest of it was me just clicking my thumb, waiting for something that I actually wanted to interact with. So it's different mindsets, it's different worlds altogether, even if it is living in the same world, because you're not dealing with the same exact stuff. And so if we start rationally looking at things from a different kind of perspective, understanding that the flora and the fauna were different back then. They had the ability to do different things, because the same as you can use herbs as medicine and things like that, it has effects. They had different plants and things that could do those kind of things, or maybe different, depending on what their needs and stuff were at the time. The planet, as you see with evolution, just naturally things develop what are necessary. The planet all works this way. Most of the time, I'm not a plant person, but I watch that cool lady that does the is it poison or is it snack, and she has shown me from watching her stuff that most of the things that you can eat are the ones that have developed some kind of like protective mechanism. So they got the sharper little edges on the leaves or things like that, versus like the pretty ones are more usually like poisonous type of things. So it's the different adaptations. So if something isn't poisonous, it had to adapt to make it a little less appealing for people to work with, so it gets the edges. So everything would have different properties that it was having to work with, and eventually working with it the same way any herbologist or botanist or whatever the word that I'm looking there for works with these different things, and they learn how they interact and stuff differently. You learn the different combinations, you learn how they interact on things differently. The world that they were able to work with, we can't completely replicate, because we're not living in that exact world. We live in our time frame with our flora and our fauna and our skills and technology and the different things that, and we're able to do the same types of things in our own way. And this has happened through all the different time frames. And if we want to place the time frames, yes, I know this has kind of turned into a rant and a really long video. If you want to watch, you're going to watch. If you don't, I don't care. You probably haven't made it to here. If you have, congratulations. You're one of the very few that watch the long videos. I have no idea why I just went on that. I just noticed how long this was, and then I am completely ranting and completely lost off of what I was trying to say. But my point here is, you have the logic to put together the actual time scale and timeline of how things actually happen, versus being told narratives that don't make sense, fit things that don't logically fit in time frames and tools and things like that, because we want to fit this very linear narrative. That the more that we are doing archaeology studies and things like this and digging up more things and finding more things, we're showing that linear timeline is definitely not correct. It has too many anomalies to, I hate that word, to make any logical sense anymore. And it's up to the people to really use their brains and stuff, because the scientific community doesn't just let you fix and change things. They have a very strict scientific method in the way that things are, and yes, that worked to build all of the data that we have now. But now that we have so much data and so many anomalies, that it doesn't make sense to do the things that we do linearly anymore. Like, if you came up with a theory that explained everything in the world, science doesn't want to accept it because it's not falsifiable, because if it includes everything and explains everything in the world, then you can't prove that it doesn't, there's nothing that it doesn't explain. So then it's not falsifiable. You can't prove it wrong. Thus, it's not. So even if you explain reality, science wouldn't accept it because you can't prove it wrong. Thus, we're not going to accept truth if we can't prove it wrong. That's the world we're working with. Those are the people that we're working with. I love them to death. They gave us all of the information that we have, the technologies that we have. Everything is off of their back. So I'm not trying to disregard all of the amazing hard work that the scientific community has brought to the world. I'm just saying that evolution is a real thing, and progress does pass the where things are at. You can outgrow coping mechanisms. You can evolve past thinking. At one point in time, everybody thought that the world was flat, that everything revolved around the earth and not the sun. These narratives got changed, but the scientific community almost has like a stronghold on changing the narrative because they've created rules that don't allow anything outside their thinking. So it's up to humans to just do it for themselves. And we have all of the pieces thanks to them and AI, and you can actually work with it all yourself. You can look logically at putting together the science of all of the geological stuff that has happened to the earth that we know, that we can track and look at. And even if there's stuff that's not, like it's outside of our record period, you still have evidence of those things. Like you can still look at satellite images and see areas that went through mass flooding. You can see the patterns of the stuff. So there's a way to really logically look at things. The reason that you're not going to find the debris is I want to say it's a colossal temple. I suck at words. The Indian temple in Ellora, the Ellora cave type of thing. They removed 200,000 basalt rock, pounds of basalt rock, and there's no evidence. Like, where did it go? Well, if a massive flood took that debris, no duh, it's not there. So now we're looking, we know at least beyond the last flood, right? So it had to have gotten taken away by the flood. So it had to have been there before the flood to be taken away by the flood. So there gives you kind of like a starting point time frame. So it's the same as the Sahara Desert. You have the volcano, and then you have the flooding path that goes over and actually takes out some of the volcano. So now we have a time frame there, right? You know that it had to have happened after the volcano exploded or erupted, but then it also has to align with another flooding that happens to get the exact time period, right? And so you can kind of triangulate using all of the evidence that we already have. You just have to start using different fields to triangulate the things instead of linear thinking.